All right, we are now ready to shape the dough. So at this point, the dough has risen for 2.5 hours. We folded it twice. The dough is actually looking like dough. So what we're going to do is we're going to put it onto your work table. We're going to divide it. We're going to shape it. We're going to let it rise in the bannetons. And then the next step is going to be actually baking the bread. So use your scraper. We're going to take the dough and put it down onto the surface. Now, just to make sure that the dough actually cooks at the same speed and we're actually doing 2 different loaves, I recommend here weighing the dough. So I've got this tool. You can use a dough scraper if you want. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to divide the dough roughly in half and then figure out how to make them equal. So I take the dough, I've got my scale, I zero it out, and I have about 25.5 ounces on this one, 28.7 ounces on this one. So roughly 27.5 ounces should be equal. So take the dough and just add some on. Now, here comes one of the parts that takes some time to master, but it's not too hard. So what we're gonna do is actually folding and shaping the dough. So take your dough, and what you're going to do, you're gonna have it kind of long. You're gonna take 1/2 of it, you're gonna fold it onto itself, and then carefully, you're going to start pushing all the sides into the center. So what you see is you start getting a taut top here. So you're going to turn and push it all in. And once you have the top, which is all kind of taut, what you're going to do now is you're going to, with your hands, push underneath and turn. And as you do that, you can actually see the top of the dough surface start to get more and more taut. So you're going to do that a few times. And again, you want to get a nice taut surface. And once you're done with that, you're going to put that one aside. My surface here is starting to get a little bit sticky, so I'm going to put a little bit more flour onto my work surface. And now I'm going to do the other one. So I'm going to again take my dough, put it onto the bench, grab roughly half of it, and start pushing all of the outside edges into the middle. And as I do that, turn it. And if your hands get too sticky, just put a little flour onto your hands and keep turning. So now you can start seeing a nice smooth surface over here. So what I'm going to do now is flip it over and start pushing underneath, a motion like this, and turning it. So it gets a nice taut surface up top. And again, if your hands start getting sticky or you feel your hands getting too stuck to the dough, it could potentially tear the dough. You don't really want that. And now we have 2 really nice surfaces. And if you actually look closely, you can see little bubbles on the surface. So you know that the yeast, the sourdough yeast that you made, is actually working. So what I'm doing now is I'm putting some flour onto the top of the surface. This just keeps it from sticking to what I'm going to put it in next. So hopefully you guys have bought these banneton bowls. These are essentially bowls that allow the bread to rise during the final rise, the final fermentation. What you do, you can see there's a fair amount of flour in here. To prevent the dough from sticking, you just add flour into the surface, you rub it around with your hands, and then the dough is going to simply rise in here for the next 2.5 hours. So as you see, I put some flour in, I rub it nicely into the bowl, and I'm going to take my dough. Now here's what's an important part. I'm going to flip it over and put it into the bowl. So the nice taut side is facing down, so it should look like this. I'm going to do the same now with the other bowl. I'm going to add a little bit of flour into my banneton. Now I'm probably guessing some of you are saying, well, I don't have a banneton, what can I do? In that situation, what you can do is use a glass bowl, but I would flour it pretty well. One other option is to put a towel, like a dish towel or a cloth towel, into a glass bowl, flour that really well, and then put that in the bowl. You just don't want it to stick. So now I take it, again, smooth side down, put it in, and now I'm going to cover both again so they don't dry out for their final rise or the final fermentation. So I'm going to cover one. Now I'm going to cover the other one. Now the final rise is 2.5 hours. One of the most important things we're going to have to do, and I'm not going to have a recording of this step, is to preheat your oven. So roughly 1 hour before you actually bake the bread, you should start preheating your oven. You're going to be preheating to 460 degrees. I have a pizza stone in my oven. If you don't have a pizza stone, you could use a baking sheet, but at some point a pizza stone is pretty good to have in your oven. And then the other important thing, you need to actually create steam when you first put the bread into the oven. And in order to create the steam, you should have a pan on the bottom of your oven that you add water to. So I'm going to show you that right now. But we're going to let these two breads sit now for the next 2.5 hours, and we're going to go look at the oven. So in my oven, as I mentioned before, I've got a pizza stone. Again, if you don't have a pizza stone, you can cook it on a cookie sheet. And then to create steam, I have a cast iron pan. Any sort of pan should be fine. You just want to make sure it's oven safe. And so what you're going to do is preheat your oven, again, 1 hour before baking. So after an hour and a half from this point, you're going to set it to 460 degrees, and I'll come back for the next step. So hopefully this is all making sense so far. Ask questions in the comments.